Both are from IIMI Kolkata, International Management Institute, which has a business school in Delhi and Kolkata to the best of my knowledge. The topic for today's discussion has been chosen focusing board effectiveness. But before I should start something on the topic and would open the discussions for the panelists, I will just be moderating. As you can see, in last many events, I was also speaking, but yes, I will share my reflections wherever the thoughts would ignite my mind and I would be in a capacity to add some value. Dear friends, for your benefit, I would like to mention that we all, in a collaborative way, have made this initiative of establishing Independent Directors Databank successful. And I'm very happy to share with you, we have about 22,000 director members. Out of this, we have more than 3,500 women directors and women leaders. We have more than 1,600 companies regularly searching. And as part of our commitment to support the professionals as well as the companies for inducting more and more independent directors wherever needed, based on the requirements, based on the skills and capacities, we are trying to bring more listed and unlisted companies on board so that we could achieve the central purpose and the vision by which this data bank has been initiated. As part two of my initial remarks, I would like to mention that a number of institutions have played a key role in helping us in bringing this together, and they are our partners to this initiative, and primarily for the purpose of bringing more knowledge on board by way of their experiences as an academician, as a researcher, or as a practitioner in the industry. As part of this, we created a larger network of important institutions from the country who are either having a dedicated center for corporate governance or are sincerely engaged in researching on corporate governance from various aspects and placing the research findings forward so that whatever the academics is producing could be made use in terms of its implementation by the directors and the boards and the companies. With this objective, we have created a network where we have two IIMs, IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Bangalore. Both have dedicated centers for corporate governance. We have ISB Hyderabad. We have IMT Ghaziabad, with whom we have done recently a panel discussion on ethics in corporate governance. I was also a part of it. And in addition, we have International Management Institute, Kolkata as well on board as one of our partners. Besides, we have all three professional institutions, National Stock Exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange, IP, Hyderabad, and so on. So in our commitment to constantly have an engagement with you and to strike a dialogue on one or the other important theme which contributes to enhancing your knowledge and also supports you in terms of your delivery when you be a part of the board, contribute as a board member across various companies. We try to bring in almost every fortnight one panel discussion, and today's discussion is a part of it. Now, if I introduce you with the speakers for the day, and as you can see, I am a professor, an academician for last 25, 26 years associated with different universities. And now for the last 7 years, I am heading the School of Corporate Governance and Public Policy with IICA, and have deep interest as a learner to read more about corporate governance, to read more about board governance, to read more about the key institutions of corporate governance, that is you all, so that I could contribute as and when possible in whatever way. And as you can see, the two key speakers of the day, both are from academics. So I'm sure in this panel discussion, you will find more research based discussions. The discourses which have a strong connect with the extensive research our researchers have placed, so that it is not just the reflections of practice, but also the outcomes of research where practice needs to pick up and develop further efficiencies and effectiveness. And I'm sure that is something which is going to contribute for establishing effective boards, which are the key to an excellent board governance, which finally contributes to the highest possible standards of corporate governance in the country, while maintaining a good balance between conformity, that is conformance, or you can say compliance, as well as the performance. Because, my dear friends, in today's corona days, when we all are facing pandemic, we all as human beings are suffering. And as far as the economic ecosystem, the business ecosystem is concerned, the business continuity is a greater challenge. The boards have a larger role to contribute towards managing risk, towards being more effective while remaining at their own places, conducting board meetings in a virtual way. Of course, to one extent, it creates challenge, and on the other extent, it has really provided an opportunity to discuss more and to engage more. But the question is, we have to keep the level of our commitment high so that the effectiveness of the board can be enhanced. If you introduce Professor Tirthankar Nag, he is a doctorate from IIM Ahmedabad and presently a professor and Dean Research and International Relations at IMI Kolkata. He engages with teaching at the doctoral and master's programs, and also with the research which has come out with various publications published in international peer reviewed journals, and also with the Stanford University. He has received multiple awards and recognitions for his academic work, like Chaudhry Padmanabham Pant Award, Sahir Memorial Award, and many more from the key institutions of the repute of World Bank Institute also. He is a TEDx organizer and a mentor of Atal Tinkering Lab at his institution, and also leading the Center for Corporate Governance at IMI Kolkata, which has been sponsored by our sister organization, that is National Foundation for Corporate Governance, under the administrative control of Ministry of Corporate Affairs. If I would like to introduce you with Professor Chanchal Chakravarti, he is an associate professor of finance at IMI Kolkata. He has to his credit PhD and Masters in Commerce from University of Budawan, and his work has been primarily focused on a very important issue which on and off we are reading these days in newspapers, the financial restructuring. He has done extensive research and have received various awards for the research papers from institutions like IIM Ahmedabad. Professor Chanchal Chakravarti has also received multiple awards from various institutions. To name I would like to mention Saurabh Shivhare Memorial Young Researcher Award. He was conferred upon in 2016 by Indian Commerce Association. He is also engaged in various consulting projects on corporate finance, financial restructuring, corporate governance, earnings management, and the payout policies which are followed by the corporate sector. Now, I would like to invite Professor Nag for an initial remarks. Dear participants, if I would like to mention, we have planned to have initial remarks by both the speakers for around 4 to 5 minutes. And then we will have a panel discussion going up to 50 to 60 minutes. And then finally, we will take up the questions which you can type in the chat box, or those who don't find it too convenient, we can lastly take it up straight from your side as well. And I would request if during the discussion, we all can keep ourselves mute, and we can stop our videos. Once you are speaking, you can unmute yourself and can start your video. So over to you, Professor Nag, for your initial remarks, please.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for the wonderful introduction. I think you are yourself a very reputed researcher in this field. So, starting with my remarks, the performance of corporate boards is actually dependent on directors effectively carrying out their roles and responsibilities. But the fact is that boards of directors are under great pressure to achieve multiple objectives. Sometimes these objectives are at loggerheads with each other, but mostly they would cover high quality decision making, which would drive performance short term and long term, create a company culture that would support a long term value creation, improve the board diversity, and nurture the management team, focus on sustainability issues affecting the company's long-term strategy, and enhance oversight of risk, and also strengthen engagement efforts with stakeholders and many others. So the objectives are multiple, the pressures are enormous. So if we really picture a effective board, what does one mean really by a effective board? So maybe one would like to have the right mix of members, right mix in terms of experience, in terms of diversity and other attributes, working seamlessly together to deliver high quality decisions. We would expect that everyone prepares for and participates in board meetings. There are no passive audiences, and outsiders' broad knowledge is respected. And insiders' knowledge, when we are talking of outsiders and insiders, we are really talking of independent directors, and basically the directors who are basically part of the board. So the insiders' knowledge is actually leveraged, and there is a huge amount of mutual trust. Decisions are objective and independent, and there's a fine balance between the short term and the long term. All processes are followed. There is great board dynamics, and being in a board itself may be a very refreshing experience. And one does not always have to think of risk coverage and what is happening and of incomplete information. But rarely such boards exist. So someone told me actually when I was having a discussion that a board maybe is like fire service. So you don't require it every day, but on those few days in a year you require, they must perform 100% and even beyond that. So that's what is actually meant by an effective board. So if we look at some of the corporate governance measures or attributes which has been released actually. So the IFC and BSc, they had done a study in 2018 based on BSc 100 companies. and where I mean half the companies were ranked having a very good leadership and in a good category, and the rest were ranked in the next categories where some attributes were lacking and some improvements were suggested. And of course, such kind of studies, whenever they takes place, they're based on the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance, which are widely accepted over the world. Similarly, a World Economic Forum study has ranked India at a rank of 15 for corporate governance, and second for shareholder governance. So in all, actually, we would say that we are not really too bad off, but there is always a scope for doing better. And of course, one aspect is that boards are following processes. All the compliance norms are really, very, very process centric. But the behavioral aspects also come into play when one is talking of board effectiveness. So, board effectiveness as such is a very, very, nascent and a growing area. And as we know that the kind of board evaluation is part of the Companies Act 2013. Here I'm referring to section 134 and 178. And SEBI listings, obligations and disclosure requirements, which has been amended in January. And SEBI guidance notes on board evaluation. So there are clear-cut guidelines which companies really have started following. But disclosure norms and how these findings are disclosed is still something which one can improve upon. So I would just leave my comments here that okay, there is something more which can be done maybe on the behavioral aspects, and something more which can maybe done on the reporting aspects. So thank you very much.
Great. So it was really nice hearing Professor Nag. Now, may I request for the initial remarks of Professor Chanchal Chatterjee, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Good evening to all of you. Dr. Nag has already pointed out certain important aspects regarding board effectiveness. The board of directors part is actually under the umbrella of corporate governance. And if you look at the fundamental aspect of corporate governance, it's about running the business with integrity, fairness, transparency, and accountability. Now, if you look at the whole world, different initiatives have been taken from time to time to strengthen corporate governance. You talk about the Cadbury report in the UK, or Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US, or the Clause 49 by SEBI in the Indian context, and gradually many more. The important aspect is that in case of corporate governance part, if you concentrate only on the Indian part, we have seen that from inception, there are different committees which have been formed from time to time. You talk about the Birla Committee, Narayan Murthy Committee, Irani Committee. You can talk about the voluntary guidelines of MCA, the revised clause 49 of the SEBI, and the recent being the Uday Kotak panel for corporate governance. Now, all these committees have recommended different aspects from time to time to strengthen the entire corporate governance system. Now, initially, at the present stage, we can see the implementation of the new Companies Act 2013. 2013 Companies Act has given extensive importance on sound corporate governance or effective corporate governance in Indian companies. Now, these committees and acts which we talk about that which are trying to implement sound or effective corporate governance, why is it required? Why should we implement sound corporate governance? The underlying answer, if you look at from theoretical perspective or research perspective, is very clear. that if you look at the corporate debacles like Enron, Xerox, Satyam scam, WorldCom, in all the corporate failures, some of the failures in some of the corporate frauds, governance was an important issue. Now, in order to ensure that all stakeholders' interests are protected, not only shareholders, but all the stakeholders. You talk about environment, you talk about society, you talk about other various stakeholders. To ensure that all stakeholders' interests are protected, an effective and proper governance is always required. Now the question is, in order to ensure this effective governance system to protect all stakeholders' interest, different acts, different committees, different guidelines which have come from time to time. And it's very clear to us that it's a dynamic subject. It's not that static. So time to time things are evolving. The corporate governance system which we had earlier, now things have improved a lot over the time. And Dr. Nag has rightly mentioned that India is not doing too bad in the respect of governance parameter. It's doing pretty well. The important aspect, if you see the governance perspective, if we want to ensure effective governance, the main central theme is the board of directors. So how the board is comprised of, the composition of the board is very important. You talk about the chairperson, you talk about the executive and non-executive directors, you talk about the appointment of independent directors. So all these are important to ensure the formation of an effective board. So how does the board execute those functions? If you look at the Indian perspective, we have seen very clearly, if you look at the annual reports of corporate governance reports of companies, mostly in the Indian context, we find that there are 5 important committees through which the board try to implement the entire governance system. One can be the remuneration and nomination committee, which is very vital. Second is the audit committee. Third is the CSR committee. Fourth one is the risk management committee. And the fifth one, we can say, stakeholders relationship committee. Now, each of these committees have certain guidelines, have certain roles to play. And if we assume that these individual committees are working towards the specific goal of the organization, that we are running the organization, we are ensuring all the functions of the company are governed with transparency and accountability, then there is nothing to be worried about. Now, managing different types of committees, managing different type of people, managing different types of activities of the people, that's a big challenge. Here lies the role of the board of directors. So not just the mere formation of the board is important, how each of the directors of the board is contributing to the board, it's a very big challenge. And in this context, several questions may come, be it in Indian context or in US context or in UK context. Yes, some board members do contribute effectively, whereas there may be some other board members who may not be able to contribute properly for the effective implementation of the governance system. Now here, I'm sure through discussion, several aspects will come regarding the board effectiveness. But one thing I feel very sincerely, that in one hand we have the compliance, the rules, regulations, acts, guidelines given by the Companies Act, SEBI, or many other organizations in different countries. On the other hand, the intention of the management. So my strong feeling is that if you concentrate on the compliance part and reporting part, it's not a big deal. So compliance is one issue, and core intention to ensure proper governance is a different issue. So I would like to focus more on, I would like to rather give more importance on the promoters or the owners and the managers who are actually owning the business, running the business, executing different corporate functions, until and unless they have very specific core intention to ensure transparency, to ensure accountability, to ensure protection of the all stakeholders' interests. Only, effective governance cannot be ensured only through compliances. So compliances, reporting, disclosures, all are important, but the most important is that executing everything with true intention of governance is most important. I'm just looking forward to many more aspects will come regarding the governance issues, how the board of directors can become more effective for the company. So let's see how discussions come through. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Uh, Thank you, Professor Chanchal and Professor Nag, for very interesting initial remarks and setting the tone for the discussion. What we can summarize out of this initial discussion is conceptually, corporate governance has built over a period of time, as Professor Chanchal has referred to the Cadbury Committee, Sarbanes Oxley. There are many more which are significant, King's Committee report, and so on and so forth, which has really paved way in terms of the development of the framework of corporate governance world over. The concept was enunciated by Bob Tricker, who was a great professor of management. And while intriguing and researching on these issues, he found that governing the company is not just the function of a management, because the nature, dimension, design of a company, right from development of an idea to articulating an idea and bringing it to the real shape by involvement of multiple stakeholders, the influx of agency problem has created a challenge that corporate governance needs to be studied, researched, and practiced well. So he has very rightly mentioned on this aspect. And one more aspect which he very beautifully touched, that the touchstone of the effectiveness of the board depends upon three things. As we all understand, that when we analyze any value chain, of course, it is a matter of a study for the subject of engineering. There are three key aspects which are very important. The first aspect is the input. The second aspect is the processes. And the third aspect is the output. If we look at these three together, we find that board effectiveness is nothing but a question of effectively managing the inputs. Means having the right chair in place, having the right set of directors in place with the requisite skills, which has an alignment with the business model, which has an alignment with the vision of the company, which has an alignment with the strategic competitive advantage it wants to develop over a period of time. And the input also requires a very effective management, which not only executes whatever is directed, but also places the MIS and requisite information analysis before the board so that a forward-looking action can be taken. And for this, as step two, there are processes, means board processes. So the first aspect, that is the input, creates a bigger challenge for the board dynamics. Then second is the processes, means the processes of the board. It may be possible that the directors on board have very good dynamics. They respect each other, they gel with each other, they understand each other's strengths, they understand each other's challenges, they understand each other's expertise and experience and the passion. But even after having good board dynamics, if the processes are not set right, the processes which articulates the functions right from input to output, there could be a larger challenge of board effectiveness, which I'm sure we would be discussing in today's discussion. And the third aspect, the output, means the measurement as to how much is the machinery giving as an output. In a cricket match, which is a very good example of a team which requires dynamic dynamics and processes, the output and the outcome is the score. So similarly, there is a provision of assessing effectiveness. There is a provision of evaluating the boards, evaluating the performance of each and every director, shuffling, reshuffling, changing the board positions, and so on and so forth. So my dear friends, board effectiveness in summary has a lot to do with ensuring good board dynamics amongst the board members as well as setting the processes right. So, in order to take this discussion forward, my question is to Professor Nag, what do you see? Is it just the regulatory compliance sufficient for making great boards, or do we need to something more for a board to be termed as more effective?
So I guess Professor Gupta has beautifully defined what is meant by board effectiveness. So input, processes, and output. And along with that, we have got board dynamics. So if you take all of these, together, and they are going on right, so it would actually lead to, board effectiveness. So if one really needs to have good board effectiveness, one needs to understand what to actually measure and how to measure. So the question that has been asked is that, okay, does companies really need to exceed what is, given in the compliance norms? Actually, this is a very interesting question for, both of us. That means Professor Chatterjee and myself, because we are right now doing a project on this with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and where we have looked at these activities, where we have termed these activities as beyond compliance. That is going beyond or exceeding what is, required by the regulatory norms. So most of the times, as Professor Gupta has mentioned, that corporate governance is seen through the lens of compliance management. That okay, there are some documents which tells the board to do something about processes, about inputs, about outcomes, and we are following that, and somehow measuring that. Though measuring that or board evaluation is not a very easy task. But all these things may not be integrated with the strategy, sustainability, and risk management of the companies. So some of our research findings, of course, this is not something which is final, is that board training at various levels may indeed lead to higher board effectiveness. That is one of the findings. In a board training is mentioned, but what kind of training, what to do about it is not really mandated. Now, the interactions of corporate governance practices and firm performance, because when we are talking of output, we are talking of output which is a very high quality decisions and which would lead to overall organizational development over time. So our study finds that okay, above median performance may be achieved by really implementing risk management policies. Of course, every board has a risk management committee, but are there really effective risk management policies in place? And removing the information asymmetry. That means, does board members are they updated, or are they aware about significant events which keep on happening? And lastly, as we mentioned about training. So all these three things taken together, if like companies focus on these three things, maybe it would lead to above median performance, and that would mean that companies have to exceed the compliance norms and walk a step further. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. For an effective board, as Dr. Nag has just mentioned, we could very well understand that companies need to travel many more extra miles beyond crossing just the level which has been fixed by the regulatory bodies as a matter of compliance. Reason being, there are many more issues which require serious engagement and many more challenges which comes on the way to the directors, as you have very well explained. The problem of information asymmetry before the board of directors, the problem of huge board agendas, problem of non-timely circulation of the agenda papers, that too huge in number, problem of not adopting digital technology in pushing the agenda or the requisite information, risk management, and so on and so forth. So how do I take it on the other side of the table if we prepare a checklist of these challenges and the key aspects which the members have to look into as far as ensuring effectiveness of the board is concerned? What I see is multiple skills and area of expertise, and also the quality of board members, which become a key challenge where a balance needs to be ensured. I'm sure you all are aware, as part of LODR regulations, it is important for companies to mention and report the size of the board, the names of the board members, and the respective skill areas. I would like to understand the perspectives of Dr. Chatterjee as to how these multiple expert areas create a challenge for the company and how they can be mapped so that the board quality could be enhanced.
Okay, it's really a nice question. Regarding the composition of the board of directors, if you look at the corporate governance report, I'm talking about the disclosure part of the company, mostly we find that companies disclose that we select our directors based on certain well-defined parameters. Means they should have knowledge in accounting and finance, in taxation, overall knowledge in the governance part, the leadership abilities and all. Now, this mere mentioning of those things, I think it's inadequate. So for a company, if you want to compose a very constructive board with multiple expertise of different directors, one thing is very important, that we need to find out that what are the broad important parameters which we actually require for composition of the board. Means what are the effective qualities that we need within the board of directors. For instance, I'm talking about, let's say, one public document, so nothing, no problem in mentioning. If you look at the corporate governance report of Infosys, you'll find that they have defined certain important parameters, that financial diversity, global business, leadership quality, accustomed to technology or not, board service and governance, sales and marketing, etc. Now, these 7-8 parameters, when they have mentioned, it's not that every board member is an expert in all the fields. It's not necessary. So I may be a board member and I am not very much sound to technology part. Or maybe I'm a board member, I have knowledge on finance and governance, but not in marketing and sales. So mapping of each and every parameter, board member A, what are the parameters he or she is matching? Board member B, what are the parameters which he or she matching? So this matrix, mapping of this matrix is extremely important, so that we can identify that out of the total board members, suppose there are 12 board members, so how many board members are having the requisite expertise in each and in the required fields, so that the composition of the board becomes more effective. For instance, if we find that there are many board members who do not have expertise in technology part, so that's a drawback for the company. So the company has to appoint or invite board members who have requisite expertise in the field of technology. So this mapping part is very important. What I'm trying to say is that if you look at the disclosure part of the companies, just there are many companies which just disclose that we look at so and so parameters, and accordingly we appoint the board of directors as per the recommendation of the NRC committee, etc., etc. But which director which director is having the expertise in what field, and which director doesn't have the expertise in what field? This mapping part is extremely important. One, for disclosure part, and two, for getting help from each of them in the respective fields. So this mapping part is extremely important. I found in Infosys. I'm sure many other companies are also doing. At the same time, there are several companies which do not disclose this mapping part, or maybe they are doing, but in reporting part, we do not find this from research point of view. So this mapping part, I think, it's to be very specific and very effective. That is what I feel in this context.
Yes, I completely agree to Professor Chanchal. Skill-based mapping is key to the success, not only for the board, but for the entire organization. And that is the reason it is very clearly propagated. A very simple phrase: right person on the right job. This is something which we used to study in human resource, and the same applies for the board. But I would like to add further, just to endorse what Professor Chanchal has said. This again, mapping of skills, identification of the skill-based gap, and then the significant role of nomination and remuneration committee in terms of identifying the right set of people who are most befitting for the position is the real touchstone. What it requires is to set those kinds of governance operating system, performance systems, and performance culture in an organization, which of course is to be driven from the chair, that each and every company becomes aware of the importance of this aspect. But if we presume that companies do it, and as Mr. Chanchal has also observed in the case of Infosys, and I have also come across during my interactions with a large number of directors representing different companies. Now, I would like to quickly know from Professor Nag, if a board member is selected based on identification of that skill gap and he is more befitting for that position, how can he contribute in a more impactful manner so that board performs well and help company sustain in the longer run? Because the purpose is to upscale the company, its operations in the longer run, and board is on the driving seat. So the larger responsibility is there on every director and collectively on the entire board. So what are your perspectives on this, Professor Nag?
Okay, so carrying on from Professor Gupta and Professor Chatterjee, I think that is a very interesting question. One of the basic criteria is leadership of the board. And one thing we have been seeing actually, of course, the example of Infosys have been cited. Infosys is basically maybe I mean basically better half of the boards actually. So if you really go through the corporate governance reports of companies, so and one I mean really looks at the board evaluation part, it somehow seems very similar across companies. So they would I mean mention for the board, then for the director, for the committee, then for the chairperson, various criteria. And then there would be a paragraph I mean, written that then a board has been evaluated on these I mean, criteria. And then I mean, then there would be a paragraph which would say that, okay, then the evaluation has been satisfactory. So I mean, that is the normal architecture of a board evaluation disclosure actually. Right. Now, I mean, going forward, one would say that apart from I mean, leadership, one needs to develop a climate of trust. So if one is really talking of impact, so how would this I mean climate of trust I mean develop? So this I mean climate of trust can only be developed if, as I have mentioned earlier, one removes information asymmetries. So one has to really keep on sharing information, as I mean mentioned by I mean Professor Gupta, not just I mean before a meeting, but I mean maybe I mean continuously, and one would have to I mean create such a kind of board so that this kind of information, which is of course extremely sensitive information for the company, one has to believe that this kind of information is not really used otherwise. So I mean that becomes a point number one maybe actually. Secondly, to I mean create impact, one has to fix individual accountability wherever possible. I mean, it is not always possible to fix individual accountability, but I mean, wherever possible, one should always fix, and that always produces better I mean, results and higher impacts. And thirdly, actually, the board as a whole actually should always encourage members to speak up, because many boards carry passive audiences, and when we talk to I mean the directors, many of them they would not sort of mention it otherwise, but they would sort of say, okay, there is a baggage of passive audiences which are there in boards. So if all these I mean members are encouraged to speak up, to I mean maybe I mean create a culture of dissent, maybe new ideas can be I mean generated, and maybe higher impact can be produced. And of course, I will lastly come to the point of board I mean evaluation, which I have touched a bit earlier, is that the board evaluation is not something which the board should do for compliance, but for improvement. So how does the board I mean evaluation get translated into an active feedback I mean mechanisms, and gets I mean implemented, and there is a continuous I mean review system? This is something which I mean needs to be taken care of, and how this I mean board evaluation can also be disclosed better. So these are some of the issues which, if one I mean basically looks at it, one can maybe I mean create very highly or I mean highly impactful I mean the directors. So what would high impact I mean the directors mean actually, right? I mean it would mean I mean maybe they would I mean sort of manage risk well. They would I mean take I mean higher quality I mean higher quality I mean decisions. They would I mean bring better better I mean practices, as there has been a comment in the chat box that, okay, compliance is only meant as a minimum, so one should go beyond compliance. I completely agree with that. And how does one I mean create this high trust I mean high trust I mean environments, and how does I mean leverage the expertise and experiences and the social capital of each of the board I mean members, and how that gets I mean translated into practice. So I guess I mean all these things I mean taken together, not very easy to do. Maybe it will create high impact on part of each of the individuals, each of the committees, and as a board as a collective mechanism. Thank you.
Great. So, if I summarize what you have said, Professor Nag, in terms of the larger challenge which the board members have to register an impactful performance, to create effective boards so that companies could sustain in the longer run, I place it with 4 key words. The first, and I could see a large number of our participants are either first time independent directors or are eyeing for this position, quite passionate to serve the companies. So I'm sure these 4 statements as a part of this summary will be a great message. The first thing is to get ready. Get ready means in order to be impactful, you have to make yourself ready once appointed by way of knowing the company, by way of knowing the business model, by way of receiving the induction, by way of receiving a familiarization, by way of introducing and be introduced with the fellow members, the culture of the organization, and definitely a good relationship with the chair. The second aspect which you have insisted upon, I could demystify. Get engaged means engage with the processes, engage with the agenda, engage with the items in a manner so that you can find out what all are the strategic matters, what all are the routine matters, so that a better focus on strategic matters in alignment with the vision and mission of the company could be established, and more impactful performance could be registered. Third thing which I could brew out of what you have placed, sir, is get going. Means it is a going concern thing. Every time we need to introspect, we need to look within as to what are the accountabilities which the board has set for me, the company has set for me. What are the accountabilities and the rules which I have made for myself? How had been my performance and how that can further be enhanced by way of more engaged discussions, participations, raising questions, looking at the information, identifying the information gaps, and seeking it from the executive management, and so on and so forth. And the fourth point which I could distill out of your points was get ready for an evaluation. Means it is not just you who have to test your performance against the benchmarks or the accountabilities you have fixed, but also to be evaluated by the chair and the peers so that you keep on performing and performing for highest possible standards of performance of the company. So taking a clue from the last point on getting ready to be evaluated, I'm coming to Professor Chanchal, asking what are your reflections on evaluation of directors, because research has also identified, to the best of my understanding, whatever I have read and have been a part of, that board evaluation still is in its infancy in India, and professionally we are not much engaged on this process. On the one hand, I'm speaking this from the company point of view, and on the other, there is a great confusion and doubt in the mind of directors that we are sitting in an apex position, and instinct there is a fear of being evaluated. So would you like to share your perspectives from research as to how this field has developed over a time, what opportunities and challenges it forwards and places before us, and what do you see 5 years from now this area could contribute in enhancing the effectiveness of board and corporate governance? Dr. Chanchal.
Yes, it's a very good question, Dr. Gupta. Actually, regarding the board evaluation, Dr. Nag has already mentioned, I am taking clue from his discussion that ensuring accountability of each and every board member is important. The thing is that if we look at the board evaluation process in different companies, especially if you talk about the Indian companies, generally the nomination and remuneration committee takes the responsibility to evaluate the board of directors and to take effective measures regarding replacing any directors if required, appointing new directors or reappointing any existing directors, and so on and so forth. So there's a basic structure regarding the evaluation of the directors. But I feel in different other aspects also, in different academic research also, it has been suggested that when the NRC, nomination and remuneration committee is evaluating, this is only the internal evaluation. But apart from internal evaluation, one more aspect is important, that you hire some external agency or external consultant for the evaluation part. So whenever you are hiring external agency for the thorough evaluation of each and every director, be it executive director, be it non-executive director, be it independent director, whatsoever. So then hiring those external agency and seeking comments from them, suggestions from them is also important. And one more thing is that whenever you are taking the outcomes or the results given by the external agency or external consultant regarding board evaluation, the company's management should be ready to accept the facts. If there are certain facts that maybe Mr. X is not contributing in a effective way, so company should have the courage to take appropriate action. Appropriate action doesn't mean to replace that person always. It may be that Mr. X or Mrs. whatever, he may require more training regarding board governance, regarding some expertise areas, certain skill sets. Means when external agency is giving certain report, the management should have the courage to implement that. That's very important. And second important aspect is, apart from this external agency, peer-to-peer evaluation is also very important. So when A and B both are sitting in the board of directors, A is evaluating B and B is evaluating A. So this peer-to-peer evaluation is also very important. But here one important aspect is the behavioral aspects. So when A is evaluating B, does not mean that A is criticizing B. Maybe A can identify certain problems, certain gaps within B, and those gaps, the management can take the initiative to fulfill those gaps. So this peer-to-peer evaluation across the directors, that in one hand ensures the peer evaluation part, the individual responsibility part, and also it helps to create a very positive culture within the organization, that yes, we evaluate each other, we try to help each other. It's not that criticizing each other regarding this part. So this hiring external agency and peer-to-peer evaluation is extremely important. These are very extremely important mechanisms for board evaluation. At present, if you look at the different companies' corporate governance report disclosures, as far as I have seen that if you look at L&T's annual report, I mean corporate governance report, or Infosys annual report or corporate governance report, they clearly disclose that we hired so and so external agency for evaluating each and every board of directors. But there are many reputed companies also in the Indian context which are silent in this regard. So you can assume that maybe they are not hiring external agency for evaluation, only the NRC committee is evaluating. So apart from NRC nomination and remuneration committee evaluation, which is internal evaluation, external evaluation is important. Accepting their suggestion is important. Working on their suggestions is extremely important. And also peer-to-peer evaluation should be encouraged, not in a competitive manner, in a criticizing manner, but in a healthy debate manner. So that will ultimately help each and every director individually and the company as a whole build or to create an effective board of directors, which will ultimately help in implementing the corporate governance philosophy of the company. That is what I feel.
That's very right. It's interesting to note the brief explanation about the mechanism which is in place for evaluating the directors. Of course, on the one hand, it involves evaluation by the peers. And on the other, there are examples of best practices from within the country as well as from abroad, where the companies which are poised to grow and move up in the pedestal of growth put in place an expert agency, not just for ensuring the objectivity of the evaluation of the individual performances as well as the board's collective performance, but also to bring in the expertise which drives the results in a much objective manner, in a much transparent manner, with a positive note and with a minimum possible bias. Here, if you allow for the benefit to the discussion, I would like to again make it very simple. I'm not referring to the sections of Companies Act or the LODR provisions regarding board evaluation, because that is something confined to the compliance aspect. And as in the initial remarks, we have already said that we have to move many more extra miles going beyond compliances. So that would be better if we engage with the process to understand the spirit. And if we talk in terms of the spirit of this performance evaluation, the entire thing can be divided into three aspects. The first aspect is the pre-evaluation phase. In the pre-evaluation phase, the company needs to be very articulate in terms of placing a process and mechanism as to whether the evaluation will just be a peer-reviewed internal evaluation to be led by the chair, or it will involve an external agency as well. At the same time, the board can also have a discussion in terms of utility of this and being very transparent to each and every member so that a positive impact on their readiness and positive mindset towards being evaluated could be developed. Of course, regulations will not talk about it. These fine prints have to be well crafted, well thought of, and well designed by the board, by the chair, and has to be collectively placed as a professional work culture and professional process of the board. Then the second aspect is during the evaluation, how fairly we come up. There are so many personality tests, my dear friends, world over, where we answer to 70, 72 questions, and then that test gives us the results as to what sort of personality we are. But the touchstone of each and every evaluation depends how fairly we give our answers, we respond to it. So a very honest kind of efforts are required during the evaluation process. And the most important thing, post-evaluation, evaluation has been done. The directors individually and collectively have been evaluated. What next? Where are you placing the recommendations of this performance evaluation? Is it placed and discussed in the board? Are the outcomes used for further skill-based mapping, which Dr. Chanchal was talking about previously? Are the outcomes being looked at the present composition of the board, the present dynamics of the board, the present diversity within the board, the present contribution in the board, and does the chair lead from the front in terms of regular reviews of that report, so that every time we could work on various suggestions and outcomes of this analysis and improvise further? Because any feedback is merely a feedback if it does not feed forward. The same goes with the board evaluation. And as a feed forward, definitely we have immense opportunities where the performance of independent individual directors, including independent directors, be improvised. Collectively, the board's performance and effectiveness could be improvised. And that is the core purpose. So I'm going to Professor Nag to discuss as to how do he finds that the outcomes of all such measures of effectivenesses or performances be used or should be used for enhancing the effectiveness challenge. Professor Nag.
So, I mean, that is again, I mean, very interesting question. So, mostly as I have mentioned earlier also, this, I mean, evaluation is a process which is, I mean, carried out either by self-assessment or by, I mean, third parties. And the kind of report is there, the feedback is there, but the actionable points which are really suggested are sort of, I mean, never implemented. So, I mean, that is the kind of a regime actually we are in. Now, I mean, why are not many of these points implemented, or I mean, are they, I mean, difficult to implement? So now that is the question we have to answer. Maybe, I mean, implementing some of these action points would be really hard for some of the boards actually. So now I'll just, I mean, tell them a story of an Indian board some time back, where and I see a question on trust deficit popping up from Mr. Sanjeev Sachar in the chat box. So, so the actionable point was that whenever an audit committee used to have access to the CFO or the chief auditor, so the CEO used to be with them, and one of the action points was that, okay, can they be provided access alone, right? So I guess, I mean, and then this was implemented by the intervention of the leadership or the board, I mean, leader, right? So I guess here, I mean, whenever you are talking of actionable points, the board leader plays a very, very important and effective role. So he has to empower the board. He or she actually, I mean, he or she has to take a stand, and he or she has to end this information asymmetry. So I guess if one does all these kind of things, maybe these action points which come out of this board evaluation process can be implemented. And if these are actually implemented, I think I mean, all the points that Professor Gupta and Professor Chatterjee and others are mentioning, they would be, I mean, taken care of actually. Thank you.
Great. So what I could make out of it, trust, as you have mentioned, of course, one of the participants has also raised this question. Trust is an important aspect and underlying prerequisite for an effective board or board as a collective team. Board members need to trust their own competence of others, and also should carry that sort of dynamics and relationships with other directors that we earn trust as well as trust others. Because This is the touchstone which is required for the conduct of a good peer review, where every member of the board is independent, yet objective as well, in terms of honestly contributing and evaluating each other's performance, plus points and minus points. To summarize, board evaluation or measuring the effectiveness is one of the best practices which we could see right from the introduction of Companies Act 2013 and also the introduction of listing obligations and disclosure requirements after the clause 49 has been adopted by Indian regulatory framework, but a large has been left open in terms of its adoption and in terms of developing its fine prints for making boards more dynamic and more contributory. While passing this statement, I very well understand the business ecosystem in the India, which is not much different from many countries in the world, where the companies are closely held, the promoter driven family business companies, not so keen on identifying the skill gaps or mapping it with the availability of the boards, not so open, many windows which allows the fresh thoughts or the best practices to wind in, which could help them develop a mindset where more experts or more professionals as independent directors or women directors be appointed. Because on many of the discussions I sit, and every time this question comes, that the family driven companies appoint from known people, from friends club, from golf club, from old boys club, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the challenge of sustaining and growing a business rests with the promoter. And what my personal observation says, my dear friends, the new generation entrepreneurs, the next generation of promoters is much more professional in their attitude and in their aptitude, either because of the reason they are very well educated, well experienced, well traveled, well networked, well conversant with the multiple thoughts, and are trying hard to bring the best expertise and professionals on board. Of course, if we expect that in a very short span of time, regulation could make such a dent that all companies start appointing in a more objective manner and boards being evaluated in more objective manner, and that is disclosed and used as a feed forward more objective manner, definitely it is a more ambitious target, I would say. But yes, the landscape is changing gradually and rather rapidly. And I see a lot of positivity in the ecosystem, positivity in the thought process, thought leadership, positivity in the mindset. And I'm sure in 5 years or 10 years from now, the situations which will be much more different, when we will not just be talking about global best practices. One such is board evaluation, but many more will not just be incorporated in the regulatory framework, but companies will be instrumental in adopting it and practicing it in their approach and practices. I think we have spent around uh, uh, 60, 70 minutes on this discussion. It would be great if we can take up some question. Uh, so let us take questions from the chat box. Dr. Tara, can you help us uh, taking up the question? There is one question which I see from the chat box from Mr. Anand Garg. Board performance being a collective responsibility and lack of quantitative objectives for a director's performance make it more qualitative assessment? How does a board make this director assessment more quantitative and objective? Dr. Nag, would you like to reflect upon it? And then we'll quickly catch up with Chanchal.
Yes, you are right, Mr. Garg. We don't have really good instruments by which we can really, evaluate quantitatively. By that, I mean kind of Likert scale based kind of instrument which has been tested. Right, we don't have that, and so most of the board research, it has focused on processes which are much more quantifiable rather than behaviors for which there is really a lack of instruments which are there. Right. So you are actually right in that respect actually. But the evaluation norms or the SEBI guidelines which are there, so it is quite a detailed one, and each board, based on their objective, they can have criteria for each of the four categories, that is the member or the committee or the board or the chairperson, and based on each of these categories they can have their own evaluation, usually done through questionnaires or through the interviews, and it can be a self-assessment or self-assessment of the board, or done through a third party. So we are going in the right direction. Of course, in a few years' time, we might have very well established instruments in India, which will be followed by board to evaluate the kind of performance of each of their directors. Thank you.
I would just like to add here. On the quantitative and qualitative framework for evaluating the board. Of course, we can refer to the framework suggested by SEBI, and also can refer to the frameworks which have been placed forward by OECD and IFC at the global level. Just on a quick note, I would like to add, board is a collective entity. No one outcome can be apportioned to a specific board member. So in a larger extent, the discussions on evaluating the performance rests on how and in what manner the members have contributed to the key agenda issues which are strategic on nature. When it comes to the question of quantitative aspects, definitely what is more critical, and I find when I read so many research studies globally, that in India still the presence of board members in the board meetings, or I would say in short, attendance is a big challenge. In some cases, we find nominee directors don't attend on a regular basis. In some case, even such challenges exist for independent directors. The challenges are all, there were an interesting study I would like to mention. On an average, how much duration the board meeting is conducted in India. So of course, the parenthesis is very wide. The board meetings are as small as an hour and as big as I have observed 11 hours or 12 hours also in some companies. I would not like to quote the name, but yet Indian average is still much lesser than what the average of the companies who are in Forbes 500 list, or you can say the top-notch companies of the world. So attendance in the board meeting, dedication of time in the board meetings, length of the board meetings, questions raised in the board meetings, supplementary info. There are many things which are quantified in the framework in addition to the qualitative aspects, which make the entire exercise much more fruitful and productive. And that is the reason it is often propagative that a third party evaluation by an expert agency or expert professional should be promoted, because he comes with this dedicated assignment and an experience on this aspect which the entire board or even the company secretary may not have, even the chair may not have. So in spite of the fact that the chair is committed to this in a very independent manner, as one of the participants is asking a question, the exercise may go futile if you don't know how to operate a machine. So better an outsider come with a machine who knows how to operate it and how to effectively utilize it, so that it weeds out the entire gamut of efficiencies or inefficiencies by placing it in a report which can further be used for improvising the whole process. Now I'm taking the another question. In today's era of technology, this is a question of Mr. Garg. In today's era of technology and speed, seeking your opinions on organization looking for young independent directors. Any reflections from the panelists, please? Anybody can come.
Here, one thing I would like to mention regarding selection or identification of independent directors. Generally, the qualification of the independent directors is very much vague. Yes, you should have
No,
knowledge on.
Dr. Chanchal, the question
Yes,
is on how companies looking for young independent directors for the board position.
yes, why not? But there is a problem in the culture aspect in the Indian context, I feel. For instance, if you look at the appointment of independent directors, young professionals from other companies should also be encouraged to serve in the boards of other companies. But unfortunately, in India, there are many companies, most of the companies, which do not allow their top executives or young executives to serve as board member of other companies. So this becomes a hindrance, I think. So if the companies take a policy that if a company has some good quality executives, top executives, young executives who have the competencies to serve other companies' board, maybe one or two other companies board should be allowed. That is one important part. But there are many companies, as I said, unfortunately, they do not allow their executives, be it young executives, be it top executives, to sit on the board of other companies. Yes, obviously, we will not. One company will not allow its top executives to sit on the boards of other companies which are in the same line of business. But in the different line of business, that can be I think encouraged. For instance, if you see the Infosys corporate governance report, they have a declared policy that any executive director or young executives can serve in a maximum of other two companies boards, and those companies should not be in the similar line of operation with like Infosys. That can be one helpful measure, what I feel in this case.
Well, I just have a very quick remark on this. I don't know what the participant meant by young independent director on an old independent director. I'm sure even the one of 60 age may not like to be termed as an old independent director. So that's one part of it on a lighter note. On the second part of it, what I see, if you look at, see, there are 6,000 listed companies and there are around 22,000 unlisted companies who are, as per law, Companies Act, they are required to appoint independent directors. If you analyze it further, which I have done to a larger extent, what I find in so many mid-cap companies and even in the large cap companies as well, the orientation has much shifted with new thought processes in place. The newer companies, the newer startup companies have been started by the next generation or the 20th century generation entrepreneurs. They are young, their thought process is young and global. and bringing more and more young, I would say in 30s or in 40s, independent directors and women directors on board. And there are umpteen of examples to this effect. So we should not see that board positions are just meant for those having 3 decades of experience to their credit or 2 decades of experience to their credit. And especially while undergoing this pandemic times and the risk issues and the disruptive technology in place, a lot of disruption in place on the business model, the companies are on the more lookout for people who belong to the area of technology, who belong to the area of artificial intelligence, and gradually they are opening up for bringing those people on board who can help them managing crisis, who can help them ensuring the continuity of the business. So that's what I wanted to add on this. Now, another point which one of the
Can I add
participants,
something?
sure, sir,
Yeah, just on this point, I would like to mention that Indian boards are getting younger
younger.
in terms of age. And secondly, the board, tenures are also, getting lower, right? So if you combine both these things, maybe there is a huge scope, as Professor Gupta and Professor Chatterjee is saying, huge scope for, young people to be on the boards. Thank you.
That's great. Now let us take up another question.
Sir, one question is, I'm
Yeah.
Dharshankar. One question is there any personal liability of an independent director? So I request you to take up this question.
Okay. Dr. Nag, you have some reflections on it?
Yeah, could not understand the question. Can it be repeated once more?
Yeah,
Are
the
there,
question
yeah,
is there any personal liability of an independent director? One of the participants has asked this question.
Yes, see, personal liability, I think that would mean getting into another, discussion actually. Of course, this will be a very drawn out discussion. So, so I guess there are lots of things which are there, which can be mentioned. Right, and I guess that would get into altogether another kind of discussion. So the answer is both yes and no.
see, it is the answer is I would like to add what Dr. Nag has just mentioned. Position in the board, even as an independent director, comes with lot of rights and lot of responsibilities individually and collectively. Board has, we need to understand this, board has a responsibility to pursue the purpose of company and to serve the stakeholders of the company, including the shareholders as well as others. Board has to guide, counsel, mentor, and direct the executive management for the execution roles, and also has to play an oversight while performing all fiduciary roles, roles on advisory, roles on monitoring basis. Various reportings and reports have to be signed by the directors individually and collectively. Companies Act in general and listing obligation disclosure requirements in particular, which I would request the participant to refer because this is not the apt platform to articulate all those provisions, clearly articulates that for anything and everything where the processes fails or the decisions fails or there is a problem in reporting observed which is not in the interest of company, the directors individually and collectively are to be made responsible. So what is the final message for us is to very clearly understand that it is not a bed of roses. It requires ensuring that you don't have a pecuniary interest and you are fairly independent, which regularly you have to ensure and be on board, and to contribute by all possible means in the interest of the company. Otherwise, if you fail in terms of discharging your duties, obviously there are provisions to prosecute, and there are many who have been prosecuted. We can look at various collapses, corporate governance collapses in India and abroad. And in many cases, directors, even as the chair, has to resign because of these responsibilities only. So let us make this thought very clear that board position does not come with a personal responsibility. I hope we could answer your question. Now let us move on to the next question quickly, and we will finish in another 5 minutes. Any other question, Taraji? There was one question I was finding interesting. There are many we may not take up because of the paucity of time. The speakers and I myself can respond to it if we will look at the chat box and we will do that. There was one question that these days there are not many companies are in financial losses and financial distress. So should a professional choose to select a board position if offered in such companies or not? So any reflections on this, Dr. Chanchal? Because you are a financial expert, so I would like to hear it from you.
Financial distress, financial sickness. Very interesting question. See, my personal view is that nobody can tell you, yes, you should join this kind of companies or you shouldn't. Only thing is that whether a company is financially healthy or financially distressed, that's about the financial performance of the company, the financial health of the company. But whenever you are joining the board as a board member, you need to ensure that you are fulfilling your responsibility as a board member, so that each and every activity of the company is actually carried out in the best interest of all the stakeholders. So if a company is not doing well right now financially, the company may come out of this financial distress in near future. So there is no problem in joining this company, but you have to make sure that management functions and governance functions are different. So whenever you are joining a board, you are joining in the governance functions. Your objective will be to look at the functioning of the companies. I mean, I'm talking about the governance of the companies. The company should take all important strategies for the benefit of the company and for the benefit of the stakeholders. No matter whether the company is currently in a good financial situation or in a not good financial situation. That's a different aspect. In future, the company may come out of this financial trouble. In future, the company may succeed. So whether the company is financially healthy or not, that should not be the main criteria for joining a board. Now, there can be the issues that the seating fees and all those things will definitely vary according to the financial health of the company. But as far as the activity is concerned, role is concerned, you should not link your governance norms, governance activities with the financial performance of the company. But yes, as a board member, you should try to execute that activities of the company should be done in the best interest of the company and in the best interest of the shareholders. That is what I personally feel. Thank you.
I just would like to add one point further. See, it is a matter of commitment which comes with a position, and it is purely our choice to ride the bandwagon by joining a company which is doing very well, or using our passion, experience, and expertise in joining a company which is presently in losses. But yes, these losses are because of the business ecosystem, not because of any lapses or absence of controls or any frauds or whatsoever. So you need to be very cautious and careful. If the losses are because of the market situations, And because, opportunities can only be found in the challengeful areas. So if you found that the losses are because of the business situations, or they have not been tapped or explored in a proper manner, and your experience and expertise can contribute very well in that turnaround, and you have a passion for that turnaround, I would rather choose to join a company which is in loss and turn it around, rather than joining a company, because there I would not be counted. I would be counted where I will ensure a contribution which converts the losses to profit. So that's a better question. I think much more introspection is required on this. There is another very interesting question from Siddhartha, where he has said that board assessment is a bigger issue. And there are many more things which we find not up to the global standards as far as risk management and orderly and timely presentation of information. So he wants to ask how regulators are focusing on improvising the board processes of the Indian companies. Dr. Nag, would you like to reflect something?
Yes, I'll be glad to. So now before that, I'll just like to add a one-liner to the earlier question, which is an extremely interesting question. Even for companies which are apparently doing good, and if we take the case of Satyam, so one should do a due diligence before joining even a company which you think that is doing well, right? So I mean, you should ensure that in that particular company there is no lapse in oversight, whether it's doing well or doing bad, right? So I mean, that is one I mean rejoinder that I would like to add. So now coming back to the board processes. So nowadays, as we see, increasingly technology is being used in the processes. And going forward, technology might play a crucial role in ensuring that these board processes become far more efficient than they are today. So I guess that is one of the directions that we are seeing in boards actually. I would like to invite the other panelists to add if if they think that there are anything else which might make these processes far more efficient.
Great. There is one point I would like to add in response to what Siddhartha has asked about the role of regulators in ensuring better board processes as per global standards. See, both MCA as well as SEBI are constantly engaged looking at various aspects of board processes and improvising the regulatory framework in a much better way. There are so many examples. Board evaluation provisions are one, provisions on insider trading, provisions on unpublished price sensitive information are another, because they all form part of the board processes where the churn of the discussions makes the directors privy to something which can tarnish the image of the company and can lead to some bad practices. Regulations, my dear friends, in India is emerging, as we have seen right from 1956 to the journey of 2013. There has not been much concerns or changes, but the way it is rapidly changing since 2013, since the introduction of Companies Act 2013, and the dynamism we feel in the regulatory shifts which the SEBI is doing, addressing to multiple issues which directly or indirectly impacts the board processes and makes the provisions much more tighter. So yes, I see a positive sign on this. And other, I would like to just add, because you all represent different companies, no one country can emerge stronger on corporate governance standards unless both the hands are tied together for this with 100% of commitment. So there is much which needs to be openly discussed by the corporate sector. There is much where the company boards need to be trained. There is much where the directors needs to be oriented. And that is the purpose. We have instituted this independent directors data bank for the purpose of creating larger awareness on various issues relating to compliance, relating to governance, relating to risk, relating to performance, so that you start more questions, you create more challenges to the board, you ask a better processes and systems in place, better financial and non-financial control systems, better transparency and reporting, so that collectively the corporate governance standards could be improved. So a larger responsibility is also to be shared by the directors and individually, and the boards as well as the companies collectively, to take this vision closer to the global standards, so that we have a canvas where we should not find corporate lapses, we should not find financial distress, we should not find failure of the board, we should not find fraudulent transactions, and so on and so forth. I'm sure collectively we can beautifully paint this picture on this is canvas. So this is the last point which I would like to say. And with this, there is one good suggestion which I could see, and I would like to announce the role of proxy advisors and how they can help independent directors understand more about the companies and ensure more effectiveness. So I promise we will soon come up with a good web panel on the role of proxy advisors, and all these proxy advisors are my good friends, the 4 or 5 proxy advisory firms in India, Mr. Amit Tandon, Mr. Jayan Gupta, uh, and so on. So we would invite them and we'll have a panel discussion on this. I think this is 5:45. We were scheduled till 5:30. We have answered most of the questions. There is one last I just saw from Mukulita, that how does CSR committee play a role towards better corporate governance, as the members as well as chair may not come with an experience of or professionals in this area. See, when I planted my first tree, I was having no experience of planting a tree. So I think I have answered this question. If we have a passion to work for the wider good and the wider benefit, we have a passion to understand our stakeholders, if we are committed to connect and engage with our stakeholders, if we are committed and stand tall in terms of our commitment in devising policies which are climate friendly, environment friendly, stakeholder friendly, I'm sure we would contribute much better while sitting in the board as the chair, or the chair of the CSR committee, or the members of the CSR committee. So with this, I would like to thank my dear friends, Professor Nag and Professor Chanchal, for very insightful discussion and sharing your perspectives coming out of your research and experiences while consulting and advising to the board members and the boards, and also to our dear participants for joining us in this interesting discussion. I have personally enjoyed, and I'm sure you have enjoyed. If by mistake I have missed, because the chat box is very small, if I've missed any question, we'll take note of those questions. My colleague, Dr. Tara Shankar, is there with me, and we will respond to the respective user. We have your email IDs. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe and stay healthy. Have a good evening. We will soon come up with the next version, with the next topic. And yes, one on the proxy advisory firms and their roles and support system to the independent directors. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.